I'm Skylar Hayes, 34, CEO of a $3.5 billion fintech firm. Yet, here I was, back at the family table, listening to my father, Robert, declare, "The Hayes legacy goes to the boys." Skylar, you deal with apps. You're not cut out for real business. I had covered their $450K debt 2 months earlier, silently bailing out the very legacy they mocked me over. They saw an overlooked daughter. I saw a $3.5 billion power broker holding the keys to the land under this entire mansion. They thought I was a guest. I was the silent owner. What happens when the app developer they dismissed decides to use her $3.5 billion power to reclaim the family legacy? For the Hayes family, the narrative was always fixed. Ethan and Lucas were the anointed heirs, groomed from birth to inherit the industrial group. I was the dissenting variable, the data point they couldn't normalize. When I rejected their dusty business model for fintech 8 years ago, they didn't just disagree, they excommunicated me. My name was scrubbed from Christmas cards, family portraits, and the corporate succession plan. I was the black sheep, not because I failed, but because I dared to build my own path. While they were busy learning how to sign checks and golf with clients, I was in a cramped rental, coding 18-hour days, fueled by cheap coffee and a quiet, ferocious desire to prove them wrong. That isolation was my greatest asset. It forced me to rely only on my competence, not their conditional favor. But what was the true, staggering extent of my independent success, the one achievement they deliberately chose to ignore? While they were busy pretending to run a fading industrial company, I was quietly building a giant. My fintech firm, conceived in that cramped rental, is now valued at $3.5 billion. Forbes didn't just mention me, they put me on the cover, naming me the youngest self-made female fintech CEO to reach that valuation. My family knew none of this. They intentionally chose to ignore it, still defining me by the job I refused to take 8 years ago. Their willful blindness was my secret weapon. They labeled me an app developer at dinner, a title of derision. But that app held the algorithms that managed transactions for half a dozen banks. The true irony? I was financially powerful enough to buy and sell Hayes Industrial Group 10 times over. I had all the power, and they had zero clue. But why return to the family table only to be humiliated, and what was the immediate, painful insult that finally triggered the $3.5 billion counterattack? I studied finance at MIT, but looking at my family's model, slow, rigid, dependent on outdated connections, I saw stagnation, not success. My father, Robert, saw fintech as childish disruption. I saw the future. I didn't want to manage inventory. I wanted to revolutionize capital flow. I didn't want their moldy factory. I wanted to build an algorithm that ran faster than their industrial machines could ever turn. I tried to explain my vision, a digital, efficient enterprise, to Robert. He laughed. "Stick to the paperwork, Skylar," he said. That dismissal was the catalyst. It didn't crush my hope, it refined it, turning it into pure, focused determination. But how did that initial rejection, "stick to the paperwork," lead to my complete and public exclusion from the Hayes family legacy? Their rejection was methodical. Don't expect any handouts, Skylar. If you choose the digital sandbox, you play alone. Just admit you weren't smart enough for the real C-suite. Those words became fuel. They weren't just insults, they were a direct challenge to my intelligence, my character, and my future. Every time I reached out, they pushed harder. My mother, Diana, watched silently, occasionally offering a useless plea. Their silence hurt more than their scorn. 8 years. That's how long they actively erased me. But the moment I stopped needing their love, the logic became clear. I owed them nothing. Their judgment was based on their fear of change, not my lack of capability. I closed the door on the emotional battlefield and walked into the corporate one. But even after 8 years of silent building, what was the one final, public insult that pushed the $3.5 billion CEO to finally unleash her power at the Christmas dinner table? Every single moment of their scorn was converted into energy. I wasn't just working, I was waging a silent, private war to validate my choice. I lived on caffeine and cold pizza, coding until 4 a.m. I faced $52 million investor rejections before securing my first seed round. Ethan and Lucas were born into money. I had to fight for every decimal point of success. I chose competence over comfort, and the price of that choice was absolute isolation and relentless effort. That first small win, the successful seed round, was my private celebration. No champagne toasts, no family congratulations. Just me, the signed documents, and the realization that their rejection had made me unbreakable. The money wasn't the point yet, the proof was. Despite my undeniable financial success, how did my family respond when news of my Series D funding reached their privileged ears, and what was the immediate, final insult? I made headlines securing my Series D funding. It was a $500 million round that solidified my $3.5 billion valuation. The family couldn't ignore it, but they could certainly rewrite it. My mother called, not to congratulate, but to offer a thinly veiled insult. "That's wonderful, dear. But your father and I hope you're keeping up with your taxes. Those tech companies are often just bubbles, you know." The sheer audacity, reducing a global success to a bookkeeping issue. They minimized my achievement to maintain their own sense of superiority. That conversation was the final nail. I stopped seeking their recognition and shifted my focus entirely to their weakness, the one I had just secretly bailed out. They wanted to see me fail so badly, they failed to see the $3.5 billion threat sitting right in front of them. The game was no longer about validation. It was about absolute control. What was the ultimate secret weapon my grandmother left me, and how did I use it to become the true, quiet owner of the very house they used to humiliate me? Just as the bitterness reached its peak, fate, or rather, my grandmother, Eleanor Hayes, intervened. Months after she passed, a trusted family lawyer contacted me. My family thought they had accounted for every dime of her estate, but Eleanor, the quiet matriarch who always saw my potential, was smarter. She established a second, secret trust fund, entirely off the books, designated only for me. This wasn't charity, it was a strategic investment in my future, shielded from my father's corporate greed and my brother's incompetence. The fund was substantial. It gave me the capital needed to transform my fintech firm instantly. More importantly, it came with a note, handwritten by Eleanor, "My dearest Skylar, the Hayes name is only a burden if you let them define you. One day, you will need to stand your ground and defend what is truly yours. Use this not as money, but as a weapon." I finally had a silent partner who truly believed in my power. Eleanor's money wasn't just fuel for my company, it was the capital I needed to attack the weakest links in the Hayes empire. The family was obsessed with surface value, the mansion, the brand name. They ignored the fundamental structural problems. The factory land was leased, and the lake house property, which they flaunted, was tied up in a murky, high-interest note due to years of mismanagement by Lucas. I worked with my legal team, all under strict NDA, to identify properties that, if acquired, would give me silent leverage over my father's entire operation. The first target was the lake house. Lucas had been bragging about renovating it for months, unaware that the note he defaulted on was now held by a shell corporation, my corporation. The acquisition was executed with clinical precision, finalized just 3 days before that fateful Christmas dinner. The second was the factory land lease, bought outright. They thought they were the industrialists. I was the one who actually owned the ground the factory stood on. Their Christmas gift from me? An eviction notice, wrapped in legal certainty. Imagine the looks on their faces when Robert Hayes announced the succession, oblivious that the entire inheritance was sitting on land I now owned. What did I say when I finally stood up at that Christmas table? The day before Christmas. I sat in my penthouse, not wrapped presents, but legal documents. Purchase agreements, lease contracts, the mortgage note on the lake house, all transferred to my holding companies. I traced the details. The factory land was mine. The house they were planning to use for future holidays was mine. Every paper trail was ironclad. This wasn't petty revenge, it was a hostile takeover executed with financial and legal precision. My goal was to completely destabilize the foundation of their misplaced arrogance. Then, I pulled out Eleanor's note. I reread her words, "One day, you will need to stand your ground and defend what is truly yours." She knew my family. She wasn't giving me permission to destroy them, but the tools to demand respect. I realized the money wasn't the core issue, it was the ability to force an interaction based on my terms, not theirs. My victory wouldn't be in the papers they signed, but in the silence that would follow the signing. That night, the official Christmas invitation arrived via a formal email from Father's secretary. It listed the time, the dress code, and a subtle note regarding the new seating arrangement: Ethan and Lucas at the head table, me near the window. The irony was palpable. They were meticulously planning my exclusion, completely unaware they were planning the venue for their financial execution. I smiled. It wasn't a bitter smile, it was the quiet confidence of a surgeon who knew the procedure was already a success. I chose my dress carefully, a simple, sharp black number, powerful but inconspicuous. I placed the legal file, a thin, innocent-looking folder containing the death warrants for their egos, inside my clutch. I wasn't just walking into a Christmas dinner, I was walking onto a legal stage, ready to deliver a performance 8 years in the making. The tension was immense, not from fear, but from the sheer anticipation of seeing their faces fall when the financial reality hit them. The dinner is set, the family is smug, and I have the evidence. What specific jaw-dropping announcement did I make right after Father announced the boys were the new owners of the Hayes legacy? The air in the dining room was thick with old money and unsaid history. Father, Robert, stood up, clearing his throat, radiating self-importance. He raised a glass, but his eyes were on me. Tonight, we celebrate the future of the Hayes legacy, a future anchored in strength, not fleeting technology. I'm proud to officially transfer command of Hayes Industrial Group to my sons, Ethan and Lucas, men who understand real assets. The room applauded. The applause was a hammer blow, validating 8 years of their contempt. Robert paused, looking directly at my isolated seat. Of course, Skylar is here too. We are grateful she could tear herself away from her little app development. Remember, Skylar, the industrial group isn't some digital toy. We hope your venture doesn't cost you too much. Maybe she can program us a better inventory system now, Father. That was it. The public shame, the condescending dismissal of my $3.5 billion valuation as a little app. Diana gave me a frantic, silent plea to stay quiet. I realized they hadn't just ignored me, they actively needed me to be a failure for their egos to survive. I placed my linen napkin on the table, a small, decisive sound that cut through the polite murmurs. I stood up slowly, calmly, clutching the innocent-looking file. Every eye in the room pivoted to me, expecting the usual silent retreat. Robert. Ethan. Lucas. Please, enjoy your applause. But before you finalize your celebratory drinks, I have a small technical amendment regarding the real assets of the Hayes legacy. My voice was steady, perfectly level. I wasn't pleading, I was making a statement. This was the moment 8 years of isolation and relentless work had prepared me for. I pulled out the thin folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the table towards Robert. It was the deed to the factory land, executed under my holding company, dated 3 days prior. The industrial group, which you value so highly, operates on land that is, as of Tuesday, legally mine. The same goes for the lake house, Lucas. I own the ground. You own the metal. And you can't run the metal without the ground. The room fell into an explosive, stunned silence. the sound of $3.5 billion of quiet power finally hitting home. They looked confused, then horrified. What was the very first thing Robert Hayes, the man who just lost his entire legacy to his app developer daughter, screamed across the table when the silence finally broke? The silence was shattered by Robert. "You treacherous little bitch. This is illegal. You think you can steal my legacy? Lucas, the lake house. What about the lake house remodeling loan? I defaulted on the high-interest note." The carefully maintained facade of the Hayes family crumbled. Robert snatched the deed, his hands shaking so violently he nearly tore the paper. The guests, all major figures in the city, watched the spectacle unfold in horrified, morbid fascination. I let the chaos wash over me for a moment, absorbing the sweet, clean taste of justice. "It is perfectly legal, Robert. The lease expired 2 weeks ago. The property was transferred from the holding company that owned the underlying land rights, which I bought outright using Eleanor's trust. Lucas defaulted on his note, allowing my shell corporation to acquire the debt. Every transaction was conducted at arm's length. Your lawyers will confirm this tomorrow." I pointed to the factory land deed. "Skylar, that land now costs you $100 million to release from me, effective January 1st, you've ruined us. What do you want? Is this about the CEO chair? The CEO chair? Robert, my company is valued at $3.5 billion. Your industrial group is barely worth $200 million and is now dependent on my goodwill. I don't want your dusty CEO chair. I want the respect you refused to give me for 8 years. I want you to know the app developer owns the dirt under your feet." Diana finally found her voice, tears streaming down her face. "Diana, Skylar, please. It's Christmas. We're your family." Family? A family doesn't actively plot the financial and emotional destruction of one of its members. You chose the legacy over me 8 years ago. I simply chose my competence over your conditions. I looked at the stunned guests. "Skylar, enjoy the rest of your meal, everyone. I've already had my dessert." I turned my back on the hysterical screaming of Robert, the pathetic whines of Ethan and Lucas, and the useless pleas of Diana. I walked away, not running, but gliding. The mansion had always felt cold and suffocating, but now, leaving it felt like shedding a heavy, decades-old coat. I didn't just walk out of the room, I walked out of their lives, finally free of the Hayes burden. My phone buzzed, a reminder from my secretary, FinTech Q1 projections, exceeding expectations. The revenge was complete, but the real victory was the freedom to focus on the future. The ultimate payback wasn't taking their assets, it was showing them that the greatest asset they ever had, me, was the one they willingly threw away. And that I succeeded on a scale they could never comprehend, without them. Did the Hayes Industrial Group survive the financial fallout from that Christmas dinner? And what was the unexpected, final act of closure I performed for my grandmother? The silence I left behind didn't last long. By the morning of December 26th, the noise began, frantic calls, legal threats, and Robert's furious voicemails. His lawyers quickly confirmed the legal truth. The factory land was mine, the lake house mortgage was mine. The leverage was absolute. Hayes Industrial Group, already weakened by poor management, could not sustain a $100 million lease payment on its primary production site. I forced the turning point instantly, activating Eleanor's strategy. I let Robert call 4 times before I finally picked up. His voice, usually booming with authority, was ragged with panic. "Skylar, please. You can't do this. This will bankrupt the company. We need that land. We're offering you 10 times what you paid." "I don't need the money, Robert. I needed the respect you denied me. This is the consequence of prioritizing ego over competence for 8 years." Hearing his fear felt like the final, necessary validation. I wasn't just going to take the land, I was going to leverage the situation for a complete restructuring of the family dynamic. Here are the new terms, Robert. 1. You publicly announce your immediate retirement. 2. Ethan and Lucas must formally resign from all executive positions and sell their shares to me at book value. 3. The land lease is granted on a month-to-month basis, purely at my discretion. You're destroying the company just to hurt us. Skylar, no, Robert. You destroyed the company. I'm simply managing the assets you failed to protect. There was a long silence on the phone. He knew he was beaten. There was no appeal, no legal loophole, and no family loyalty left to exploit. You win, Skylar. That was the most validating phrase of my entire life. It wasn't the sound of victory I craved, it was the sound of his ego cracking. I hadn't just taken a piece of paper, I had taken the only thing that mattered to him, his self-perception as the infallible patriarch. The formal papers were signed in the lawyer's office 2 days later. Robert looked frail, the weight of the $3.5 billion reality finally crashing down. Ethan and Lucas didn't speak. They signed away their inheritance, their authority, and their dignity. I left them the empty shell of a company and the psychological burden of their own failures. I didn't need to dissolve the industrial group. Controlling the land gave me the quiet power to dictate its every move. My revenge was financial, absolute, and elegantly quiet. I had everything. The respect, the assets, the power. But I still hadn't dealt with the mansion, the place where they planned my final humiliation. I decided I didn't want it. The Hayes legacy, steeped in contempt, was toxic. I wanted my own legacy, built on my terms. I instructed the lawyers to transfer the factory land to a profitable long-term lease agreement and the lake house to be sold. I kept only the power, not the possession. With the Hayes name finally purged of its toxicity, what was the symbolic, final act I performed at my grandmother's grave that truly sealed my freedom and my new, $3.5 billion legacy? January 1st. The official start of my new life. I drove, not to the office, but to the family mausoleum. The revenge was over, the power secured, but a debt of gratitude remained. I stood before Eleanor's marker, a quiet granite monument tucked away from the pretentious family plots. The morning air was crisp and clean. The silence felt different now, it was the absence of conflict, not the presence of scorn. This was the one relationship in the Hayes family that was pure, and I needed to close that loop. I placed a simple white orchid on the grave. I pulled out the handwritten note from my clutch again, the one that referred to the trust fund as a weapon. Skylar, I did it. Eleanor. I used your wisdom. I didn't destroy them, I just showed them the reflection of their own failure. And I took back my life. The trust fund wasn't just money, it was the final, unshakable vote of confidence I needed to finally break free. Thank you for seeing the CEO in the little girl they dismissed. Standing there, I realized the revenge had never been the destination, it was the unpleasant, necessary road back to myself. I had spent 8 years driven by resentment, but now, the drive was pure purpose. My company, my rules. My legacy, my design. The $3.5 billion valuation suddenly felt cleaner, earned not from the desire to crush them, but from the commitment to build something real and lasting. Unlike the crumbling industrial group. I took the flimsy Christmas invitation, the one listing my isolated seating, from my clutch. I had kept it as a physical reminder of the contempt. Now, it was meaningless. I carefully tore it into small pieces, letting the wind carry the fragments over Eleanor's plot. It was a symbolic rejection of their entire narrative, a quiet burial of the pain they inflicted. The past was literally dissolving into the air. Skylar, goodbye, Hayes family. The past stays here. As I walked back to my car, I knew my family would inevitably try to contact me again, not with love, but with legal desperation. They would try to manipulate the long-term lease. Try to beg. But I was immune. I had achieved the rare kind of power where I could dictate the terms of my own life, free from their emotional blackmail. My final act of revenge was simply living my best life, proving their dismissal was the most costly mistake they ever made. I left the cemetery and got in my car. The rearview mirror reflected only the road ahead. The Hayes family had chased a rotting legacy of steel and contempt. I built a legacy of digital gold and unwavering self-worth. It was the only inheritance that truly mattered. I drove toward the future, armed with Eleanor's wisdom and $3.5 billion reasons to never look back. The final question is, after losing everything and watching me walk away, what happened to Robert, Ethan, and Lucas Hayes in the years that followed, and what does true power feel like when you have absolutely nothing left to prove? The weeks following the Christmas confrontation were a blur of media interviews, legal cleanup, and board meetings. I was the financial sensation, the $3.5 billion CEO who brought an industrial giant to its knees. I had everything I ever worked for: power, respect, and independence. But there was a strange, hollow feeling at the pit of my stomach. The adrenaline had faded, and what was left wasn't pure joy, but a silence where the resentment used to scream. I stood in my office, looking at the city lights. I had crushed the Hayes legacy, not for profit, but for validation. And now that I had it, I realized validation from those people meant nothing. I had spent 8 years building a fortress around myself, fueled by the desire to prove them wrong. Now the fight was over, the wall remained, and I was alone inside it. The success was real, but the personal victory felt sterile. I didn't need their approval, I needed genuine human connection, something the corporate world rarely offered. I consciously shifted my focus. I launched the Eleanor Hayes Women in Tech Foundation, pouring my resources into empowering young female founders, the people who actually understood the grind. I started mentoring, giving away the competence my family valued so little. The joy I found in seeing other women succeed, knowing I had removed the financial barriers they faced, finally filled the void the revenge had left. It was a legacy built on encouragement, not contempt. And what of my family? Robert Hayes, stripped of his title and dignity, tried desperately to cling to relevance. He was forced to sell the mansion to cover the remaining debts and fines. The last I heard, he was managing a small, regional consulting firm, a humiliating drop from his former empire. He became the exact kind of small-time operator he always scorned. The downfall was total, complete, and utterly self-inflicted. Ethan and Lucas, lacking competence or real work ethic, quickly squandered the little money they had left from selling their shares to me. The lake house was sold at a loss. They went from boardroom executives to struggling middle managers, eternally blaming me for their lack of foresight. They were forced to learn the hard lesson: the Hayes name only worked when it was backed by the Hayes money. Without the title, they were just two ordinary, lazy men. I never spoke to them again. The final, true victory was silence. My $3.5 billion valuation gave me security, but the mentorship gave me joy. I closed the door on the resentment, realizing the revenge wasn't just about destroying their legacy, but about financing a better one for the next generation. That's what Eleanor really wanted. The lesson? Build your own table, don't just ask for a seat at someone else's. So, after watching the entire family's spectacular collapse, do you think I truly found peace, or does the shadow of revenge always linger, even in a $3.5 billion penthouse? The weeks following the Christmas confrontation were a blur of media interviews, legal cleanup, and board meetings. I was the financial sensation, the $3.5 billion CEO who brought an industrial giant to its knees. I had everything I ever worked for: power, respect, and independence. But there was a strange, hollow feeling at the pit of my stomach. The adrenaline had faded, and what was left wasn't pure joy, but a silence where the resentment used to scream. I stood in my office, looking at the city lights. I had crushed the Hayes legacy, not for profit, but for validation. And now that I had it, I realized validation from those people meant nothing. I had spent 8 years building a fortress around myself, fueled by the desire to prove them wrong. Now the fight was over, the wall remained, and I was alone inside it. The success was real, but the personal victory felt sterile. I didn't need their approval, I needed genuine human connection, something the corporate world rarely offered. I consciously shifted my focus. I launched the Eleanor Hayes Women in Tech Foundation, pouring my resources into empowering young female founders, the people who actually understood the grind. I started mentoring, giving away the competence my family valued so little. The joy I found in seeing other women succeed, knowing I had removed the financial barriers they faced, finally filled the void the revenge had left. It was a legacy built on encouragement, not contempt. And what of my family? Robert Hayes, stripped of his title and dignity, tried desperately to cling to relevance. He was forced to sell the mansion to cover the remaining debts and fines. The last I heard, he was managing a small, regional consulting firm, a humiliating drop from his former empire. He became the exact kind of small-time operator he always scorned. The downfall was total, complete, and utterly self-inflicted. Ethan and Lucas, lacking competence or real work ethic, quickly squandered the little money they had left from selling their shares to me. The lake house was sold at a loss. They went from boardroom executives to struggling middle managers, eternally blaming me for their lack of foresight. They were forced to learn the hard lesson: the Hayes name only worked when it was backed by the Hayes money. Without the title, they were just two ordinary, lazy men. I never spoke to them again. The final, true victory was silence. My $3.5 billion valuation gave me security, but the mentorship gave me joy. I closed the door on the resentment, realizing the revenge wasn't just about destroying their legacy, but about financing a better one for the next generation. That's what Eleanor really wanted. The lesson? Build your own table, don't just ask for a seat at someone else's. So, after watching the entire family's spectacular collapse, do you think I truly found peace, or does the shadow of revenge always linger, even in a $3.5 billion penthouse? Months later, finalizing Eleanor's estate, I opened her last safe deposit box. I expected another will, perhaps jewelry. Instead, there was a single leather-bound journal. My mother had dismissed Eleanor as frail, but inside was a detailed ledger of Robert's corporate malpractice, dating back decades. The ledger detailed every shadow deal, every illegal dump site, every inflated asset value he used to secure loans. The Hayes Industrial Group wasn't just mismanaged, it was a criminal enterprise disguised as a legacy. The company was toxic, far beyond repair. I found a final entry, written the day before my grandmother died. My dear Skylar, I know what Robert is. He fears you because you see numbers clearly. He knew your competence would expose his rot. He didn't dismiss you, he exiled you to save his own skin. The humiliation wasn't about my app, it was a preventative measure. They had to make me leave before I uncovered the truth. The contempt was a smokescreen for deep, criminal fear. This realization was the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. Eleanor's trust fund wasn't just capital for me, it was the clean money she had quietly pulled out over years. It was her attempt to separate my financial destiny from his looming legal collapse. She didn't just want me to win, she wanted me to survive the inevitable implosion. The sheer depth of my grandmother's love and foresight brought tears I hadn't shed when Robert screamed. The money, the land, the power, it was all secondary. Her final legacy was the truth, and the means to escape the toxicity of the Hayes name forever. The full, shocking truth transformed the nature of my revenge. It wasn't about settling a score, it was about necessary self-preservation. I didn't cause their downfall, I merely enforced the legal consequences of Robert's crimes that he had been trying to outrun for decades. I closed the journal, the ultimate evidence of my family's self-destruction. The mansion was sold, the company in perpetual lease under my control. I sent the damning ledger anonymously to the SEC. No theatrics. Just quiet, final, and undeniable justice. What did the SEC filing ultimately reveal about the full, terrifying extent of the Hayes family's crimes, and how did I use my power to ensure that Robert's legacy was permanently written out of history? The revenge was done, the truth was out, and the family was neutralized. I spent the next few months living in an unfamiliar quiet. The emotional trauma didn't vanish instantly, but the constant need to fight did. I felt lighter, like a deep infection had finally cleared. The fear of being crushed by them was replaced by the certainty of my own competence and power. I redefined success. It wasn't about the $3.5 billion valuation or the ruined Hayes name, it was about the work itself. I immersed myself in the Eleanor Hayes Foundation. Seeing the spark in the eyes of young female engineers, knowing I was giving them the chance I almost lost, felt more rewarding than any hostile takeover. I was building a better legacy, a legacy based on competence, not bloodline. I finally understood Eleanor's gift, freedom from their orbit. The journal showed they weren't malicious villains, just desperate criminals. That knowledge brought a strange peace. I didn't need to hate them. I filed them away as a closed chapter. The only thing they still owned was the legal consequences I had put in motion. I could finally focus on the road ahead. With the Hayes family's criminal enterprise now fully exposed to the SEC, what final, legal fallout did Robert face, and what was the one thing he desperately tried to ask me for years later? 3 years. 3 years since the Christmas dinner, 3 years since the SEC investigation began. My company had gone public, our valuation soaring past $5 billion. I was on the cover of Forbes, talking about conscious capitalism. The past felt like a bad movie I'd watched once. My life was peace, productivity, and purpose. The Hayes family was just a footnote in a legal textbook. I was in a quarterly review when my chief legal counsel, Mr. Klein, slid a note across the mahogany table. It read, "Urgent. Robert Hayes. He is requesting a direct, personal meeting. Says it's about the land and Ethan." The old tension, dormant for years, twitched in my stomach. I dismissed the board. I hadn't heard Robert's voice since he conceded defeat. Why break the silence now? Schuyler, Klein, what's his legal status? Klein, the SEC charges hit hard. The industrial group is in Chapter 11. He's personally liable for most of the environmental cleanup fines. He lost the mansion and the lake house. He and Diana are living in a condo funded by Lucas. He's financially decimated, and the land lease is expiring in 6 months. Robert wasn't asking for money, he was asking for leverage. He wanted to use the expiring lease to force my hand, maybe get a cash settlement to save him from bankruptcy court. I felt no rage, only a profound sense of exhaustion. I had one years ago. His desperation was pathetic. Not threatening. Schuyler, did he say why he needs a personal meeting? Klein, he said, I need to look my daughter in the eyes and tell her the full truth about her grandmother's decision. The old me would have leaped at the chance to hear his confession and rub salt in the wound. The new me valued my peace above all. The truth was already in Eleanor's ledger, and the SEC was handling the consequences. I had already achieved my closure. His attempt to manipulate me using the word truth felt hollow. I looked out the window at the gleaming tower of my company. My integrity was the only thing at stake. Schuyler, Klein, send this message back. The land lease will be allowed to expire. All rent terms and payment schedules remain as dictated in the original agreement. Any outstanding debt will be handled by the court. I have no interest in Robert Hayes' version of the truth. I made my peace years ago. It was a refusal dressed in legal formality. I didn't owe him a conversation, a reaction, or even a moment of my time. The only thing they deserved was the quiet, cold execution of the law. Klein nodded, understanding the gravity of the indifference. He was expecting the old, angry Schuyler, he got the calculating CEO. Later that day, Robert sent a desperate text message to my personal number. "Skylar, please. Ethan is sick. He needs help. It's the least you can do." He was still trying to manipulate, using a new, painful leverage. I deleted the message without a flicker of emotion. My commitment was to my chosen legacy, not to his failures. The true victory wasn't destroying their lives, it was reaching a point where their crises, their needs, and their very existence held absolutely no emotional power over me. That indifference, the quiet refusal to engage, was the most profound act of self-love and the final, beautiful conclusion to my revenge story. Did I truly ignore Robert's plea about Ethan's sickness, and what was the singular, final moment I allowed myself to reflect on the choice I made between family and self-preservation? Robert's text about Ethan lingered, a small pebble in my shoe. Was I truly capable of that coldness? I pushed it aside, focusing on the foundation. My work was good, my hands were clean, but that desperate plea haunted the edges of my math, $5 billion serenity. The truth about Robert was clear, but the truth about my brothers remained murky. A month later, at a charity gala, I saw Mrs. Davies, the Hayes family's old housekeeper. She looked frail, but her eyes were kind. She cornered me, ignoring my security detail. "Skylar, about Ethan. He's much worse. You need to know he stopped Robert's second attempt to sell Eleanor's land 5 years ago. He ruined his own career trying to protect it." My blood ran cold. Ethan, the incompetent brother, had secretly sacrificed his chance to climb the corporate ladder by obstructing Robert. His incompetence was a years-long cover. He wasn't malicious, he was just weak, scared, and trying to protect Eleanor's legacy in his own failed way. The contempt I had for him instantly reversed into a heartbreaking pity. I had judged him solely by the surface, never digging for the true motives. My revenge had destroyed him for the wrong reasons. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep, hollow regret. I realized Eleanor knew this, too. She gave me the power to destroy Robert, but the choice to save Ethan was always mine. I chose indifference. The choice was made, but did I let the regret consume my hard-won peace? Or did I find a way to honor Ethan's quiet sacrifice without compromising the integrity of my final victory? The revelation about Ethan's secret sacrifice didn't overturn my victory, but it complicated my peace. I sat in my office, realizing I couldn't undo the legal destruction, nor could I return to the cycle of family obligation. I needed an action that honored his intent, protecting Eleanor's vision, without giving Robert any leverage. The goal wasn't to save them, but to close the moral loophole I had left open. "Klein, I have 2 instructions. 1. Find a discreet legal team to handle Ethan's mounting medical bills. Ensure Robert and Diana have no control over the funds. 2. Immediately draft documents transferring the factory land ownership to the Eleanor Hayes Foundation, effective upon the current lease expiration. No rental income, no personal gain." I was finally severing the last cord tying me to the Hayes name. The factory land, the source of all Robert's power and my family's conflict, would now fund the future of others. It was the purest form of victory, taking the toxic asset and repurposing it for growth, free from contempt. By helping Ethan anonymously, I satisfied my conscience without sacrificing the peace I had fought so hard to earn. Revenge, I realized, is a journey with only one destination: self-liberation. I didn't need to see Robert suffer to feel whole. I only needed to stop letting his actions dictate my morality. My final act was not one of destruction, but of creation. I built a legacy for Eleanor and Ethan that Robert could never touch or corrupt. I reclaimed my control over my narrative completely. I finished my call with Klein. I smiled, not a victorious smirk, but a peaceful, genuine smile. I walked to the glass wall of my penthouse office, looking out at the city where the Hayes Industrial Group no longer cast a shadow. The revenge story was over. My own story, the one about competence, independence, and conscious power, was just beginning. So, after achieving ultimate power and finding true peace, what is the single, most important piece of advice I would give to anyone considering a family revenge story of their own? I received a summons, a final, mandatory meeting to finalize the separation of assets. It wasn't about negotiation, it was about humiliation, their last chance to see me before the legal hammer fell. The setting was Robert's lawyer's drab office. The air was thick with defeat and resentment. They were all there, Robert, Diana, and Lucas. Ethan was noticeably absent. You know, Skylar, you could have helped us. You had the money and the intellect. Instead, you chose to tear down the very foundation that gave you your name. This isn't victory, it's an act of moral treason. You sacrificed your family for a fleeting headline. His defiance was shocking. Even facing prison, he refused to acknowledge his corporate crimes. It was all my fault for exposing the truth. You always were Eleanor's damaged little project, weren't you? A girl starved for attention. Did you enjoy watching us lose the house and the company she built? You should know, darling, Eleanor would be ashamed of this petty destruction. You inherited her money, but none of her grace. Diana's attack was purely personal, aiming for the emotional scars. They were masters of projection, painting me as the villain to avoid facing their own collapse. This is all on you, Skylar. You didn't just ruin Dad, you ruined me. I have 2 kids. I have no business degree, no job, and now I'm financially responsible for Mom and Dad. How are you going to fix this? You owe us. You broke the family. Lucas, predictable and pathetic, was looking for a bailout. He couldn't grasp that the family was already broken long before I exposed the rot. I just removed the beautiful facade hiding the decay. I fixed nothing, Lucas. I simply ensured you all faced the consequences of your own actions. Robert, our actions? What about Eleanor? She was the one who pulled the strings. Skylar, Eleanor gave me the funds to build a legacy based on honesty, something none of you ever understood. Your legacy was a pile of debt and environmental crimes. I didn't ruin you, you chose that road yourselves decades ago. I looked at Robert's lawyer, who nervously shuffled papers. Skylar, are we finished with this theater? I have a $5 billion company to run. The Hayes Industrial Group is now officially under Chapter 11. The land, which Robert and Lucas failed to acquire legally, will be transferred to the foundation next month. Your time here is done. The silence was heavy. I had neutralized their emotional weaponry with financial and legal finality. I stood up, adjusting my custom-tailored jacket. I didn't glance back at Robert, whose face was pale with rage. I only spared a look for Lucas, still slumped in his chair. Skylar, Lucas, I hope your son grows up to value integrity over inheritance. It's the only real legacy. I left the room, the door closing on 8 years of rage and 2 decades of contempt. I didn't win their approval, I won my freedom. Walking back to my car, the cold clarity of the morning air felt liberating. They called it treason, I called it self-preservation. Their shame wasn't my burden to carry. I had dismantled the structure that tried to crush me, piece by piece. The revenge was complete, and the only feeling left was the quiet, profound satisfaction of having finally chosen myself. With the Hayes family legacy officially written out of history, what were the final, profound lessons I learned from this entire saga? And what is the one single piece of advice I would give to anyone who feels compelled to seek family revenge? After leaving the lawyer's office, I didn't look back. The noise of their denial faded, replaced by the quiet efficiency of my own world. Robert and Diana eventually moved to a small coastal town, their names disappearing from the headlines and the news cycles. Lucas started a low-level sales job in logistics. They were neutralized, and my peace was finally secured. But the real joy, the lasting fulfillment, came from the people who did step up when the time came. My new foundation, dedicated to female founders in tech, quickly gained impressive traction. Many of the first major donors were former executives from Hayes Industrial, people Eleanor had secretly mentored and protected over the years. They saw her vision, knew the depth of the Hayes corruption, and were quietly supporting me without fanfare. They were Eleanor's true allies, proving competence and integrity always beat inherited malice and blind greed. I often listened to the testimonials of the women we supported. Founder, VO. Thanks to Eleanor Hayes' vision and Skylar's support, I could afford the lab space and the patent filing I truly needed. This was the legacy I chose. The impact was tangible, meaningful, and completely disconnected from the Hayes family's toxic drama. I had successfully replaced the dark hole of revenge with the bright light of purpose. As for Ethan, my decision to fund his anonymous medical care was the hardest, but most necessary, step. It was my private acknowledgement of his hidden sacrifice. I didn't want him to know it came from me, because it wasn't for him, it was for the integrity of my own soul. It was the final price of my liberation, letting go of the need for perfect, satisfying justice. I visited Eleanor's grave on the anniversary of her death. I placed a small bouquet of wildflowers and sat for a long time. Skylar, whispering thank you. You gave me the weapon, the battle plan, and the funds. But most importantly, you taught me that the truest power isn't in destroying what you hate, but in nurturing what you love. I learned the right lesson, Nana. I finally chose me. So, after all the destruction, the rebuilding, and the final choices, what is the single, most important lesson I would leave with you about the cost and the reward of taking revenge on your own family? It's been 4 years since I closed the door on the Hayes family for the last time. My life now is about creation, not destruction. The view from this office isn't just a testament to success, it's a constant reminder of the independence I fought for. I have built something honest and sustainable, a true legacy free from toxic bloodlines and generational contempt. People always ask if it was worth it. Yes, but not for the reasons you think. The worth wasn't in the $5 billion valuation or watching Robert face the music. The cost was the years spent fueled by hatred. The reward was the realization that I was the only one who could set me free. Revenge is a powerful tool, but it's a finite resource. You must know when to put the weapon down. The true victory wasn't the hostile takeover, it was the ability to receive Robert's desperate text about Ethan and feel nothing. That indifference was my final, ultimate control. The family couldn't reach me, emotionally or financially. My peace wasn't granted by their defeat, it was claimed by my refusal to let their desperation become my new problem. That, my friends, is power. So, if you're stuck in your own story, here's my advice, don't just focus on the destruction. The vengeance is the launch pad, not the orbit. Use the energy of your pain to build something so formidable, so clean, and so successful that your old tormentors become irrelevant. Your greatest revenge is a life well lived, independent of the very people who tried to define your worth. I honor Eleanor every day by ensuring her vision, the land, the resources, the competence, goes to people who deserve it. The foundation is flourishing. It's a quiet tribute to the one person who saw my potential. She didn't teach me how to hate, she taught me how to win by playing a better, longer game. And that, truly, is the end of the Hayes family revenge story. I look at the camera one last time. There's no anger left, just contentment. The name Skylar Hayes no longer carries the baggage of corporate corruption or family drama. It now stands for resilience, strategic competence, and the power of chosen legacy. My peace is permanent. Thank you for following my story. The city lights twinkle below me. They represent millions of new possibilities. I'm not running from my past, I've simply outgrown it. The next chapter of my life won't be about revenge, but about impact. I'm ready for the next challenge, knowing that my greatest asset is the control I have finally claimed over my own narrative. This story is not just about bringing down the Hayes Industrial Group. It's about recognizing that you are never trapped by the expectations of others. You have the power to dismantle a toxic structure and build your own empire on a foundation of your choosing. My name is Skylar Hayes. And this is how I truly won. What does it truly take to build an empire of your own? And how can you ensure your new legacy is never compromised by the shadows of your past? Subscribe to find out what I'm building next. Klein was the final bridge to the old world. A year after the takeover, he resigned. His note read, "I've settled my debts, Ms. Hayes. You taught me that loyalty to truth is more valuable than loyalty to wealth. I'm taking a year off." I respected his decision. He chose integrity over continuous proximity to power, proving my influence went beyond balance sheets. Lucas tried contacting me once. A pitiful, unsent text, "I miss the old days." The old days were built on lies. I didn't reply. Allowing silence to be the final word is often the greatest mercy. My relationship with my brother wasn't hatred, it was indifference. That indifference was the protective armor I needed to keep the past firmly in the past. Ethan is the only member I still track, anonymously. The funds ensure his care, far away from Robert and Diana. His recovery is slow, but steady. He will never know the source of the help, and that is vital. My help wasn't charity or forgiveness, it was a debt paid to Eleanor's memory. The old ties fade, replaced by a quiet, ethical obligation. Sometimes I catch Robert and Diana on social media, living small, ordinary lives in Florida. They look lost. They are ghosts of their former selves. The truth is, they were victims of their own greed long before I intervened. I simply accelerated the inevitable. The revenge wasn't the sentence, their character was. And now, their reality is finally matching their truth. The Hayes name itself is a shell. It holds no power over me. I'm no longer Skylar Hayes, the victim, I am Skylar Hayes, the architect. The toxic lineage stops here. My new ties are to the community I serve and the integrity I uphold. That's the real generational wealth, a moral inheritance, not a financial one. Success didn't fill the void left by my family. It simply gave me the perspective to see the void was always there, created by them, not by my actions. My greatest gain wasn't the company, but the realization that I don't need family approval to be whole. I am enough. That is the final, satisfying piece. The lesson here is profound. When you seek revenge, you bring their shadow with you. My final act was shedding that shadow. By refusing to let Robert's lawyer's phone call or Diana's spiteful comments into my heart, I cleansed myself. The old ties fade, not through a dramatic fight, but through sheer, resolute detachment. My new chapter title isn't the revenge, it's the rebirth. I have a new definition of family, people I choose, people who reflect my values, not my bloodline. My old ties didn't just fade, I consciously allowed them to dissolve. It's the only way to truly win. I am free. But with the old family gone, did a new kind of love enter Skylar's life? And what unexpected alliances did I forge in the wake of my massive victory? Find out next time. The greatest gift of freedom is finding new connections untainted by the past. I met Alex, a neuroscientist who runs a nonprofit. Our first date wasn't about power or wealth, it was about shared passion for impact. He knows my past, but he focuses on my present. For the first time, love is a quiet, strong partnership. My new family consists of Alex, Klein, now my trusted advisor, and the women in the foundation. We are bonded by choice, not blood. We celebrate authentic achievements, not fabricated status. This community is my sanctuary. It taught me that real belonging is something you build, not something you desperately try to reclaim from toxic people. The foundation is expanding. Thanks to the Hayes Industrial Land. We're launching Eleanor's Incubator, a physical space for female-led tech startups. This isn't charity, it's capital injection for a new generation. Every check I sign is a quiet, powerful acknowledgement that the old money, born of rot, is now fueling legitimate, clean growth. The scars from the Hayes years are still there. They are reminders of where I've been, not where I'm going. I look at photos of my old family sometimes, distant figures. There is no desire to engage. Only a deep appreciation for the distance I created. I don't need to forget the past to live my present, I just need to stop letting it drive. My life used to be defined by high-stakes battles. Now, it's defined by quiet mornings and simple choices. A weekend hike with Alex, a productive meeting with my team, the silence of my penthouse when I read. This is authentic happiness. It's not flashy, it's not vengeful, it's just solid, earned peace. The kind of peace no amount of inherited money could ever buy. What did I ultimately learn? That revenge only tastes sweet if you use it as fuel for creation. Don't waste your emotional energy on their downfall, spend it on your ascension. The goal isn't to make them lose, the goal is to win so comprehensively that their loss becomes nothing more than a footnote in your much bigger, much better story. I am the sole architect of my life now. I chose my career, my partners, my purpose, and my peace. My victory wasn't just about money, it was about reclaiming my narrative from those who tried to script my failure. I broke the cycle. I am the generation that chose integrity over wealth, and that is a triumph that will endure. I stand at the glass wall, looking out at the skyline. The Hayes Industrial Group building is barely visible, just another tower. I'm focused on the future, building more, giving more, loving more. My story isn't over. It has simply moved from a revenge thriller to an epic on legacy. I finally know what matters. The revenge story is finished, but the question remains, can a massive empire built on vengeance ever truly find lasting stability? Or are there new, unforeseen threats looming on the horizon of my perfect life? Leave a comment and tell me what you think. We've reached the end of the Hayes saga. Before I sign off, I owe you some final thoughts. If my story taught you anything, it's that toxicity, especially when tied to blood, can consume your life. But it doesn't have to. You have agency. I chose to use the poison as medicine, transforming my hatred into motivation. Lesson 1. Separate the person from the problem. You can fight the injustice without letting their pettiness infect your soul. I learned to attack the financial structure, not the man. Emotional detachment is your greatest strategic asset. Keep your heart cold and your mind sharp when the stakes are high. Lesson 2. Know your true leverage. Mine wasn't Eleanor's money alone. It was the meticulous documentation of Robert's fraud. Find the ethical Achilles heel of your opponent, the one thing they can't defend. Don't fight with emotion, fight with facts, evidence, and superior preparation. Lesson 3. Define what enough looks like. Revenge can be an endless loop. For me, enough was reclaiming control, ensuring Eleanor's legacy, and securing my freedom. Not crushing Robert into dust. Once you achieve your defined goal, stop. Draw a hard, unmovable boundary and prioritize your peace over their continued suffering. Lesson 4. Revenge is fuel for creation, not a destination. The truest victory is the empire you build, free from their influence. Lesson 5. Choose your family. Blood means nothing if it's toxic. Cultivate relationships that reflect the integrity you fought for. Your future is defined by your actions, not by their opinion of you. This is the end of the Hayes Revenge series. But my journey continues. If you found power in this story, hit the like button. If you're ready to dismantle your own toxic structures and start building your empire, subscribe now. And tell me in the comments below, what is the one thing you need to let go of to truly win?